Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right. Hello again, everyone. Hello. Welcome back to the Conscious Love Show podcast. Shane Kohler on. Pleasure as always. Happy to be back. Always look forward to diving into another episode with all of you. And in today's episode, I want to name something that everybody is feeling, that is very much in the water that we're swimming in, that is largely at the root and the source of the gender conflicts between men and women right now. And I'm just going to say it simply that the reality is that men are falling behind. And I know a lot of the ladies out there, you feel this, you see this with the men you're dating, and I know that it can be frustrating, it can be disheartening, and I want to just right off the bat today acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge for the ladies how difficult it is to be living in a world where you feel like you're moving so far ahead, and you want love, you want partnership, you want connection, and you look around at where men are and what men are doing, and you feel like, oh my God, like how am I ever going to find a partner who's on my level? And I think that frustration is so real, and it's lonely, and it's painful. And, you know, I'm a man, and I don't pretend to know what it's like to be a woman, but I think on some level I can relate as somebody who's very self-aware, as somebody who's done a lot of work on myself, as somebody who lives in this conversation constantly. And I look around even in friendships, even in communities, and like, I often feel like there's not people I can relate to on my level a lot. So like, I just want to say, I'm not saying I know what it's like to be a woman or what it's like to experience this in your love life. But I just want to say, like, I get what it's like to feel isolated, to feel like you've done so much work and you're operating from a certain level of consciousness and feeling like there aren't people who can meet you there. And I very much get what that feels like. And I can only imagine, and I see this in the women I work with and ladies in my program, how when you're going on dates and you're constantly meeting man after man after man, and you feel like these men just can't meet you where you want to be met, and how lonely that must feel. And I really get that. So I just want to, off the bat today, acknowledge the reality of that and acknowledge a social reality that women are excelling in education. We have more women graduating from college now than men, and not even close, right? Like women are pulling far ahead of men in education. In therapy, women have been going to therapy for decades. It's only very recently that men have started going to therapy at all. Emotional awareness, right? Being in tune with your own emotions, being in tune with someone else's emotions, having the language for emotion and knowing how to talk about it. Like, this is something that women have probably always been far ahead of men in terms of personal growth. Like, you know, I see this in my work. Women largely fill the personal growth space, and men are coming in and they're doing the work, but not in the same numbers that women are. And even career advancement, and this is part of the problem that I'm going to address today, is historically, this has been the place where men earned their keep, right? Men were the providers. They were the earners. They were the ones with the big careers, and that's changed. And so now women are even outpacing men in career a lot of times. A lot of women now will go on a date with a man and there's a high chance that she makes more money than he does. There's a high chance that she has more purpose in her career than he does. And across all of these metrics, women seem to be excelling and men seem to be falling behind. And I want to say that puts both people in a really awkward position, right? It puts women in a position where you feel like, I've done all this work on myself. Why can't I find a partner who will meet me? And it puts men in a position where they feel like they just don't measure up. They feel like they can't measure up. And it's deeply painful for both sides. It's deeply painful. It's deeply isolating. It's deeply lonely for both sides. And now we're experiencing what all the experts are calling a male loneliness epidemic, where we have more and more young men who will remain unmarried, who will largely fall behind in their careers or in their professional lives, who feel like they don't have a place in the world, who feel like they don't have strong friendships or strong bonds. They don't have role models, like strong male role models to look up to. A lot of these young men are sitting in their mother's basement playing video games and smoking pot and watching porn, and they feel like they have no greater purpose or no greater direction in the world. And so they just kind of default to their base instincts. Well, let me pursue as much pleasure as I can, because that's the only thing that abates my loneliness for a period of time. And this is just it's really painful for everyone, is what I want to say. It's lonely for the women. It's lonely for the men. It's frustrating, and it breeds a lot of resentment on both sides. Men feel constantly rejected by women, and this gives rise to red pill communities where men who share these similar grievances bond together and they make women into adversaries. And they weave these stories about how women are manipulative and women are hypergamous and women are all these things, and they justify their shortcomings by making women the problem. And then on the other side, we have these man-hating communities where women bond together with their similar grievances against men. And I get it, because I look around and I see the discrepancy where, the majority of men are and the majority of women are. And I put myself in a woman's shoes and I say, what must it feel like? And it would be really easy to judge and criticize and say, what the fuck is wrong with men? Why can't they step up? Why can't they be more? And I see the amount of women that are carrying these feelings and these frustrations. And of course, what are they going to do? They're going to bond together. They're going to bond over these feelings and over these frustrations. And then what happens is the conversation multiplies and we feed off of each other's pain, right? And so the more we share our grievances, the more we talk about them, the more real they become, the more they multiply. And I think it's worth stating here too that social media has done no service to anybody with this, because whatever grievance you have, you can easily find thousands of people who have that same grievance. And then the way the algorithms are designed is they create these echo chambers that continually reinforce our beliefs back to us, because that keeps us engaged, which the platform wants to keep us on the platform. And so social media has turned into these horrible echo chambers of hateful men, hateful women, and whatever grievance you have, you go on social media, that grievance gets multiplied by 100. And we start to believe that our worst case scenario of reality is the whole of reality. And that's, I want to say, largely where we find ourselves today. And if you're listening to this, ask yourself, do I fall in one camp or the other? Am I a man who hates women? Am I a woman who hates men? And I want to pose that question early on in this episode, because we're going to talk about a lot today. But what I want to say is, if you are a human being who wants conscious love, you cannot live in either of those camps. And I'm not saying that you're wrong if you feel drawn to one of those camps, because the grievances are real, the feelings, the frustrations are real. And when we have these pains and these aches and these frustrations, we look for people who will sympathize with that. This is all very normal to do. But I also want to say, and what I'm going to draw out in today's episode, is the people who are finding conscious love are the people in the world who find a way to rise above that. And that's a challenging conversation for someone who's living in grievance to hear. But here's something I want to address early on in today's episode, and then I'll paint the picture more clearly as we go through today. But underneath the large trends, so we have a large trend of men going in a certain direction with this male loneliness epidemic, and we have a certain trend of large numbers of women rising above men in terms of their personal growth, their awareness, their education, their careers, and there's this huge imbalance here. And this is a reality that's happening at scale. But I think it's a trap to focus on what's happening at scale and make that the ultimate reality for your individual truth. And that doesn't mean that it's not important. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't address, and it doesn't mean that we should ignore what's going on. But just because there are these large scale patterns, that doesn't determine what's possible for you as an individual. And I see this all the time in my work. And what I work with people is to learn relational readiness. And I've shared a lot of examples in my podcast episodes, if you listen to the podcast, of people who learned how to navigate the relational field and ended up finding their way to really healthy, conscious relationships despite these large scale trends. And so underneath the noise and underneath these large scale trends on the individual level, what you have happening is people who are becoming highly attuned in terms of relational readiness, both men and women. People who are learning to see through the noise, learning to operate from an individual truth rather than an algorithmic echo chamber. And despite all the noise and the declining marriage rates and the declining birth rates and the mass trends in men and the mass trends in women, despite all of this, people are still finding conscious love every single day. This is a reality that is still happening. I have the pleasure with the women I work with in my program to see this happening for them all the time. And I want to acknowledge the other side of it. I also see a fair amount of women who date and they seem to not find the right men and they get disappointed and frustrated by that. And I want to acknowledge that that is a reality too. But it's not the whole reality. It's not the total reality. And so what I hope to do in today's episode is present a more grounded perspective of this divide between men and women, where it came from, why it's happening now, but most importantly, how do we navigate it? Because while there are cultural trends and cultural truth, they do not determine our fate on the individual level. So let's explore this. And the first thing I want to touch on today is to name how the foundation of relationship is different than it has ever been before in history. And I think largely what's happening with the, quote, male loneliness epidemic and the large-scale female frustration with men, I think what's really happening underneath this is that the foundation for marriage and partnership is fundamentally different today than it has ever been before in history. And nobody, men or women, know how to navigate this new terrain because it's never been done before. And so like, this is one thing I'll say about my work, and how do I, like, I would say I know how to navigate this relational terrain. And it's not arrogant when I say that. It's just literally the result of practicing it myself in my own marriage, throwing myself into my own personal development, learning from leaders in the relationship field and the things they've discovered, and then working with clients on it and finding out what works for them. And I've spent my entire adult life doing this, and so I have a pretty good grasp on how we navigate the modern relational terrain. And that doesn't make me special. That's something anybody can learn, but we don't learn when we're trapped in hate and grievance. And what's happening right now is both men and women are experiencing a relational field that has never existed before in history. They don't know how to navigate this because the old models don't work. They haven't been taught or developed a new model. So they consistently hit a wall, and men get frustrated and hurt by women. Women get hurt and frustrated by men. And I've often talked about this on my show, but you know, there's nothing that cuts as deep as our relationship with the opposite sex, especially, and I'm speaking largely about heterosexual couples right now. And if you're in a gay relationship or any other type of relationship, there's nothing that cuts as deep as somebody you being romantically attracted to rejecting you, or somebody you being romantically attracted to dismissing you, or somebody that you want love with avoiding that love, right? Like, nothing cuts that deep. You get fired at work, and yeah, it hurts your professional identity, but it doesn't cut straight to the core idea of your own worth the way romantic love does. Because romantic love is very much tied up in, am I good enough to be loved? Not am I good enough to perform a role or perform a job, but am I good enough to be loved? And when we hit a wall in that area of our lives, it is deeply activating on perhaps the most fundamental levels. And it's safer to hate and resent the other side than it is to expose ourselves vulnerably and continue living with an open heart and continue searching for that real heart connection. And so that's what we're seeing today with men and women. We're seeing women who have been wounded in the relational field, men who have been wounded in the relational field, and rather than remaining open, remaining emotionally available, continuing to try and continuing to keep themselves open to love, we shut down. We make the other side the cause for our problems. And we protect ourselves by isolating ourselves from each other. And that's what's happening between men and women right now. And so, historically, since as far back as human history goes, marriage and partnership has been built on economic security, protection, family building, and social stability. And that framework is gone now, right? So if we look at the 1950s model, which, and like, let me say, it's good that that's gone, because I don't think any of us really want a 1950s marriage. But that was the model that the American dream was built on, so to speak. And so what was that model? Male provider, female homemaker. They need each other because a man cannot work 40 hours plus a week and raise children, right? So a woman cannot raise her children and work 40 plus hours a week. And I know some people are going to say, well, I'm a single mother, or I'm a single father, and I do it. And I get that. So I'm not saying it's literally not possible, but it's hard. Like, I mean, my wife and I are raising a 7-month, 8-month-old baby right now. And sometimes I sit back and I think, oh my God, like, if I was a single parent right now, I don't know what I would do. And I say that knowing that a lot of you listening right now are probably single parents. And what I want to say is, I have so much love and so much compassion for what that journey as a single parent is like, and experiencing it now as a parent and knowing how challenging it is with two of us, I can't imagine what it would be like to do that on my own. It's very, very difficult. And I was raised by a single mother, so I watched her struggle and I watched her journey. And it's brutal, right? So I want to acknowledge that. I'm not invalidating that in any way. I get the struggle of that. I get the challenge of that. But going back to what I was saying is marriage historically was transactional. It was necessity. We need one person out in the world. We need one person in the home. And like, if I take my wife and I as an example, we both work. We both raise our daughter. We have a nanny who helps out. Our daughter's just starting daycare, so she's going a couple days a week and she's learning to get integrated into the outside world. And so the model that my wife and I are living in is very different than what her parents did, which was more the traditional model. Mother stayed home, father was out in the world. And the relationship that my wife and I have is not transactional in that sense, because we don't actually need each other. We choose each other. So if my wife and I were living in a traditional 1950s model, well, I would need her to stay home and take care of the house and raise the kids, and she would need me to go out and earn the money and do all of that. And there would be a certain necessity. And while the choice that my wife and I have the privilege of experiencing today, so we are not in this marriage because we have to be, because we're stuck in it, because we couldn't be okay otherwise. We are in this marriage because we have made a conscious choice that life together is better than life apart. But that comes with a lot of complexity because there's not defined roles. There's not necessarily a defined place for each of us to exist. We might both feel like our efforts are underappreciated when, like, sure, I make plenty of money, but so does my wife. And so it's like me bringing money to the table doesn't really mean much to her. And I'm not saying it doesn't mean anything. I mean, I'm sure she appreciates the contribution and I appreciate her contribution, but it doesn't validate my existence in her life the way it would have if I were the sole breadwinner. And so now both of us participating in this relationship isn't about what function we serve. It's about how our presence adds to the life we share together. And that's a lot more vulnerable. That's a lot more vulnerable because now she's not choosing me because she needs me, and I'm not choosing her because I need her. We're choosing each other simply because we agree that life together is better than life without each other. And that requires a certain quality of character that I not only have to bring to the table and that she has to bring to the table, but that we have to sustain throughout our lives together. Like, we have to show up in this relationship day in and day out in a way that makes our presence in each other's life an asset rather than a liability. And that's maybe the highest level of accountability that anyone could ever live with. And that's something that the human ego really resists. So modern relationships are this beautiful gift in the sense that if my wife and I are going to work out long term, and I believe we are, and we're going on 10 years now, and I don't think it's ending anytime soon. But if this partnership is going to work long term, we both have to hold ourselves to a really high standard to make sure that we both continue to add value to this partnership. Neither one of us can ever rest on our laurels and say, well, the other person needs me. They don't have anywhere to go. That's beautiful, but that's also challenging. That's also vulnerable. And it's vulnerable now, 10 years in, when we both have a fair amount of security in our partnership. But let me tell you, it was even more vulnerable when we were dating. Two people who don't need each other, whose lives could theoretically be easier without the other person, presenting enough value to a relationship to make it worth the amount of sacrifice that comes in a relationship. That's super vulnerable. And the reality is that most people, both men and women, are not going to pass that test. Most new relationships hit a certain point where one person decides life is easier without this other person. And because relationships today are not transactional, they're choice-based. There's a lot less compelling us to stick it out with another person. And that goes for both men and women. And this is why marriage rates are declining. This is why birth rates are declining. This is why more and more people are isolating themselves. This is why more and more people are lonely. And I want to say, men are particularly lonely, and this is why we have the male loneliness epidemic. Men are particularly lonely because they have not been conditioned to be in community the way women have. So men and particularly young boys are taught to isolate. They're taught to be hyper independent. And so that creates a certain condition in the male psyche where even women who choose to be single or women who choose to remain out of partnership tend to build communities of friends, tend to be involved in their personal growth and their spirituality in ways that facilitate community. Men are often not conditioned to do that. And I want to say that's not the fault of men, that's the fault of our culture. Because our culture still values that kind of stoic, hyper-independent masculinity. And that is what young boys are taught to become as men. And I'm going to name this, I'm not pointing the finger at any particular woman. So to the ladies who are listening to this, I may not be speaking about you right now, but I am speaking about a large feminine trend where male vulnerability is largely unattractive to women. There's a certain cultural pattern where women want a man who can hold all of her vulnerability. But if he becomes vulnerable, she views him as weak. And that's not her fault any more than it's his fault. She's a victim of the same cultural conditioning he is. But it becomes a prison for everyone. And so we have women who are highly invested in therapy and personal growth and education. Women who are becoming more independent than they've ever been in their lives, which is a beautiful thing. You know, and I love strong, independent women. My wife is a strong, independent woman. And I think the reason I love this, and I would say this is really one of the biggest tests of a man's character. The reason I love strong, independent women, and the reason I married a strong, independent woman is because I love that she chose me for me. And there are a lot of men and women, actually. There's this whole movement of trad wives, traditional wives who want to be back in the home. And there's this whole movement of men who believe that they should be the sole providers and that they should kind of be the center of their woman's world. And there's this movement of people who are trying to go back to this transactional model of relationship. And the reason they do this is to avoid the vulnerability that the current model is inviting us into. So a lot of men say, I don't want a woman who works, I want a woman who stays home. And what they're really saying in that is, I want a woman who needs me to be her provider so that she doesn't have options, so that she's stuck with me and I don't have to vulnerably subject myself to her choice. For me, that was never viable. For me, I always wanted to be chosen by my partner. I would rather be alone than be in a transactional marriage. But that's me, and I think for some reason I'm uniquely wired that way. I'm uniquely wired towards truth. I don't want any pretense. I don't want any pretending. I want to know what's real. And my wife and I have had many conversations where if at any point we don't want this, we should choose to leave. My wife and I don't hold each other in this bondage of, you married me, now you're stuck with me forever. My wife and I hold our relationship to the standard that we should both be showing up in a way that makes the other person want to be here. And that's gotten us to where we are now, and 10 years going strong. But we both also choose to show up in a way that validates that perspective. So we have women who are frustrated by feeling that men are so far behind them. And we have men who feel like they have no place in the world. And I'm very sympathetic to where women find themselves, because it sucks to feel like you're this amazing person with all these wonderful qualities and nobody is ever worthy of them. That's a very particular kind of loneliness, and it sucks, especially when you've put so much work into yourself. I'm also very sympathetic to where men find themselves today. And this is something that I think is largely missing in our culture. And this goes back to how we expect men to be strong and independent and stoic and have their emotions under control. And we hold men to this impossible, inhuman standard of masculinity. And one of the side effects of that in our culture is that we are sympathetic to the challenges of women, but not sympathetic to the challenges of men. And I know there are counter arguments to that. And I know a lot of women might come back and say, are you kidding me? Look at all the ways that women have been impressed that nobody ever gave a fuck about. And I get that there's that layer of it as well. But I'm talking about more not the cultural conditions of the patriarchy, which are very real. And they're also a part of this conversation that I'm going to touch on today. But think about it like this. When we see a woman crying, the social instinct is to protect her. The social instinct is to support her. When we see a man crying, the social instinct is to shame him. The social instinct is to say that he's not man enough. Now, that doesn't invalidate the patriarchal imbalance between men and women and the eons of oppression that women have undergone. I'm not discounting any of that, but I'm pointing to a very real social condition where we are sympathetic to the emotional pain of women and unsympathetic to the emotional pain of men. And this has actually created a mass pattern where women are invited into therapy, women are invited into personal growth, women are invited to seek resolution for their emotional problems because we as a culture consider a woman's emotional problems to be valid. And that same courtesy has not been extended to men. And now a lot of women are out there saying, why don't men just go to therapy? Why don't men just work on themselves? And I'm going to answer that question right now. Why don't men just do this? Because they've been brought up in a culture that says doing so weakens their masculinity. Doing so makes them less of a man. And let me say, there are more men than ever before going to therapy right now. There are more men than ever before exploring their spirituality right now. There are more men than ever before throwing themselves into personal development. It's not total. Men have a lot of work to do. Men have a long way to go, but there are more men doing it now than there ever have been before in history. And I want to say, given the cultural conditions under which men are brought up, it's amazing that men are doing it at all. And I don't think we give men enough credit for the work they are doing. I think what happens to a man is if he's not doing it, he's shamed for it. And if he does it, we say, well, he should have been doing it all along. And I'm not invalidating the frustration or the pain that lives on the other side of this. But men today, like the young men and even older men, but the men who are born into today's world are being born into a world that's turning against them. Like, imagine some young man, maybe late 20s, early 30s. His entire life, he's been brought up in a world that says he's the problem, he's the oppressor, he's the one to blame for the reason everything is the way it is. And let me say, that's not untrue. Who made the world the way it is? Men. Who oppressed women for eons? Men. Who caused 100% of the wars in history? Men. So that's not untrue. But now, the men who are being brought up in today's world, even older men who have maybe perpetuated a lot of this, they didn't start it. Like, there's not a single man alive today who started the patriarchy. Men were born into the system the same way that women were. Men were conditioned into the system the same way that women were. And is the system unfair? Yes. Is the system toxic? Yes. Is the system deeply painful to live inside of? Yes. And that is true for both men and women. But what men had in previous generations that they don't have today was they had a clear path for how to be successful in the world. You go out, you get a job, you make money, you marry a wife, you have some children, and you've succeeded as a man. That blueprint doesn't exist for men anymore. And I want to say there's the relational currency that men bring in today's world. The number one thing that a man can offer to a woman that she cannot provide for herself is emotional safety and emotional attunement. And of course, she can provide that to some degree for herself, but in a partnership. Right? He can be her emotional partner. He can be her safe space of refuge from the insanity of the world. He can be a stable, consistent emotional provider. Yes, she can earn her own money. She can buy her own house. She can even have her own baby. She doesn't need him in the ways that women of the past needed him. And so the blueprint for how a man can succeed in today's world is something that, one, nobody teaches men. And two, men have been actively conditioned not to be that. That's a pretty impossible position for a man to be in. So there's a young man growing up, maybe he's in his mid-20s right now, and he looks at his father, and what did his father do? Well, his father was a provider, and his father had a family, and his father had a good, solid job, and his father did the good American hustle. And now this boy is growing up, and he can't follow the footsteps of his father. And there's nobody in his life who's telling him, well, this is what it means to be a good partner in today's world. This is how you develop your emotional attunement. This is how you develop your emotional awareness. This is how you develop your empathy. This is how you become a supportive romantic partner. This is what a woman needs from you in today's world. In fact, the same father whose blueprint he cannot follow is probably still teaching him the old blueprint. And so he's being taught a blueprint for manhood that is irrelevant. And if this man tries to go to therapy, his very own father might look at him and say, "Why are you being such a little bitch?" And I want to say this too. His father's not the evil person that we might paint him out to be. His father is trying to teach him how to survive in the world the same way he did. His father is passing on the conditioning that he received. It's an impossible position for this young man to be in. And so I want to talk about relational readiness. Because there's something I want to call out to the women right now. And this may challenge some of you, and I'm going to do it with love, but it's important. Because a lot of women have learned the language of therapy. They've learned that they have inner child wounds. They've learned how to talk about their attachment style, and they've learned how to name other people's attachment style. And they've thrown themselves into the work on a conceptual level, but not an embodied level. And here's how I know that it's conceptual and not embodied. Because if you are carrying hatred and resentment towards men, you have not learned the lessons of love. If your education has caused you to become superior, like if you're looking at men right now and you're saying, oh my God, these fucking loser men, why can't they just get it together? Why are they so far behind? If that's what your education has led you to, then all it's done is reinforce your own ego. And even though you have a lot of language even though you've done a lot of therapy, even though you know all about your attachment style, even though you can look at a man and you can name his attachment style, even though you have all of that, your relational readiness is actually not increased at all. In fact, you are no different than a man who's sitting around in a red pill community talking about how women are hypergamous and manipulative and how all the things that go on in those communities. I don't even really know everything they say because I don't follow those types of narratives, but I have a general idea of the perspective. Because these are two sides of the same coin. One is dressed up with therapy language. The other is dressed up with self-righteousness. But they're two sides of the same coin. They are two versions of responding to the same relational challenge with contempt rather than empathy. And I'd say the same thing to the men right now. If you're a man and you can't get a woman to date you, that's not a problem with women. That is your underdeveloped relational capacity. And you can't blame that on women. No woman is obligated to date you if you're not a good candidate. And these communities of both men and women who are sitting around blaming each other for the problem, rather than really recognizing the root of the problem, is that this is the first time in history that relationships are not transactional. This is the first time in history that the only thing defining partnership is the actual merit that I bring to a partnership, is the actual value that I bring to a partnership. And that is putting me in an intensely vulnerable position where I have to be chosen for what I am rather than what I bring to the table. And when I get on a dating app or when I go out on dates or when I'm interacting in the relational field, I feel so exposed and so vulnerable. And I don't know how to participate in this environment. And instead of acknowledging that within myself, I'm going to say men are the problem, or I'm going to say women are the problem. And I'm going to find echo chambers of people who feel the same. And we're going to sit around and brew our hatred together. I understand the instinct. It creates a feeling of self-righteousness. It creates a feeling of safety. It creates a feeling that I'm not wrong. It justifies myself. I get the instinct. I get where it comes from. But neither of these people are relationally ready. And I want to go back to something I said earlier in today's episode. Is underneath all the chaos, there are men who are doing the work. And I want to say something important here too, because men doing the work often looks different than a woman doing the work. A woman's work often looks like her reading a lot of books, her listening to a lot of podcasts, her digesting a lot of information, her spending time in therapy, her talking about her challenges and her fears and her struggles with a therapist or a coach or in a community of other women. That's often the way it looks for women. And for reasons I've already stated today, women have been systemically encouraged to do that kind of work. Because when a woman opens up about her problems, the society actually listens. A man's work is often done in isolation until he meets a partner. So a man's work often won't look like a woman's work. And so what I'm getting at is we can have two people who are relationally ready, who have approached the work in completely different ways. And what do I mean by that? A man who is relational ready has usually developed within himself a code of honor. Very different than a woman's approach. So this man has high integrity. He has a high level of honesty. He has a willingness to be accountable. He has a willingness to grow. So he may not know what his attachment style is. He may not know all the things that she read in a book or she listened to a podcast. But when she brings these things to him, he is open and receptive to it because his personal code of honor says a good partner is receptive to what his woman wants and what she needs. He makes emotional effort. That doesn't necessarily mean he is highly emotionally aware. It doesn't necessarily mean he has explored all of his emotions in depth. It doesn't necessarily mean that he can name and communicate his emotions easily. But it means he makes effort in that direction. He's willing to learn. He's willing to feel his emotions. And this is one of the biggest, I think a lot of women miss good men expecting his readiness to look identical to her readiness. And I think a lot of women undervalue the gift that they are to a man, in that when she shows up with her level of awareness and she meets a man who has the authentic capacity to receive that, she can be a huge catalyst for his awakening. And this is different than trying to fix him, right? So a lot of women fall into the trap of, I'm going to make a man my project. And that's a man who doesn't want to learn, who doesn't want to grow, and she's kind of forcing the work on him. That's very distinct from a man who is willing to learn, who is willing to grow. And she's presenting him with language that he's never heard before. So this is the woman who sends her man a podcast on attachment styles. And he listens to it. And then he comes back and says, I listened to that podcast you sent me. I found it really interesting. And I think I have a such and such attachment style. And that explains a lot of why I've been experiencing X, Y, and Z. He may have never found that podcast on his own. But when she sent it to him, he takes it and runs with it. And a lot of women might say, well, why do I have to be the one to send him the podcast? Why can't he go look it up on his own? And I'm going to say, because our society has given you permission to, and our society hasn't given him that same permission. Is that universally true? No. Is it prevalent enough for it to be a meaningful distinction? Absolutely. A lot of women ask me this, like, does a man have to be fully healed? Does he have to have been to therapy? Does he have to have done all the work? No, he doesn't. He has to have a strong sense of integrity, which is actually more common in men than a lot of women realize. A lot of men have an inherent structure of honor and integrity, and that's very much tied to their idea of what being masculine is. And so what they're lacking is the exposure to the ideas, not the ability to integrate them. And when women can accept that perhaps one of their relational roles in the modern landscape is to expose men to these things, because he's not going to get it from his father. He's probably not going to get it from his mother. He's not going to get it from his friends. He's not going to get it from his coworkers. But he might get it from a woman. And that's not a burden, that's a gift. See, there's a lot of talk about men needing to be leaders of a relationship. And I think that's bullshit, really. I think we both lead in different ways. You know, when I look at my wife and I and our journey that we're on of raising a child right now, in a lot of ways, my wife is leading the child rearing. Because, I mean, we could say that billions of years of evolutionary biology make her uniquely inclined to do that. But then there are also points where, like early on, my wife wanted to do all the nights. And I would say, why don't you sleep tonight and why don't you let me take a night? And she'd be like, no, I want to do all the nights. I'm breastfeeding. I need to be there for her. She needs to breastfeed. And I was like, okay, I get it. And I let her lead that to a point. And then it got to a point where it was seriously eroding her mental health and well-being. And she felt like it was her duty as a mother to handle all the nights. And I finally said, no more. You are going to sleep tonight, and I'm going to handle the nights. And I handled all the nights for like 2 months while she was able to catch up on sleep. And then we worked out a schedule. Now we alternate the nights. So I do one and she does one, and every other night we get a full night's sleep. So she led in her way until I had to step in and take the lead because her ability to lead was becoming compromised. And there are times when she does that with me, where my ability to lead is becoming compromised and she steps in. And see, this is what a partnership is. A partnership is two people living in partnership together, not putting the responsibility on one person that you have to lead this whole thing. I'm going to say this, might be triggering, but I think it's true. A lot of the standards that women place on men, that men have to be this and men have to be that and men have to be the other thing, and a man is only an acceptable partner if he lives up to this unreasonable standard of masculinity. A lot of what that is an unresolved inner child wound that wants their man to be a partner rather than their parent. And a lot of women who are highly independent in so many areas of their lives are still driven by this core wound in relationships. And then these are the same women who end up tearing men apart because he's not evolved enough. When she doesn't want to assume the responsibility of, in some ways, being the spiritual leader of the relationship. And that's not wanting an equal partnership. An equal partnership means we carry equal weight. An equal partnership means nobody is submitting their authority to the other person. We could say that's a truly feminist relationship. And I want to say, like, men need to do a lot of work. There's a reality that men have fallen behind, and I don't want it to sound like I'm not addressing that in this episode, because I am. But I think we need to recognize the larger perspective that we are all operating within a field that has never existed before. And neither of us, men or women, have the blueprint for how to effectively operate in this new relational field. And it's easier to hate and fear the other side than it is to acknowledge how vulnerable we feel in relationship to them. And in today's episode, I'm inviting the second. The most important thing for women today, as it relates to men, and especially acknowledging that so many women are going to encounter men who are simply unevolved in the way that she might need him to be. She has to be relentless about her standards. And I've seen so many situations where a man who is typically a player or typically emotionally avoidant all of a sudden rises to the occasion when he meets a woman who has really clear standards. When he doesn't feel judged, when he doesn't feel looked down on, when he doesn't feel criticized, when he doesn't feel inadequate. And it's just simply very clear, this is what I need from you. Are you going to be that man or not? There's no judgment either way. I'm not threatening your masculinity. I don't feel entitled to your effort. I'm just simply clear about what I need in a partner. And I'm inviting you into that with me. I think a lot of women are amazed when they start to operate that cleanly and that clearly with their standards, how quickly they meet a man who rises to it. But that's not easy. And I think a lot of women underestimate what her approval really means to a man. Like, I don't think a lot of women realize how basically everything a man does is driven by his need for feminine approval. Why is he working out at the gym and getting big muscles? Why is he buying a fancy car? Why do men do these things? They do them to attract women. The funny thing is like women aren't necessarily attracted to these things a lot of times, and men will do all of this, and then the only people who acknowledge it are other men. It's kind of hilarious. But It's also kind of sad when you realize how desperately men want a woman to see them and say, "You're good enough." And then they go online and they see these echo chambers of women who hate men, and they feel so defeated that they don't even try. That they were born into a world that told them they were the problem before they even had a chance to make a conscious decision about who they want to be. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for the men. It's heartbreaking for the women. It's heartbreaking for everyone. And the answer does not lie in women need to change or men need to change. The answer is both. The answer is that every individual on the individual level needs to be less entitled, needs to have more humility, needs to have clear standards, needs to have patience and the willingness to struggle in a relationship a little bit before they make up their mind about it. Needs to be willing to give someone a chance, even if that person isn't maybe what they had pictured on paper. And this isn't the hot take that's going to go viral on social media, because social media thrives on us creating enemies and us arguing with each other. But underneath the noise, there are real human beings, both men and women, who are finding conscious love every day. And I'm not saying that out of my ass. I'm saying it as someone who literally sees it happening in my work. Because that's what I do in the Inspired Love program. I teach relational readiness. And when people learn relational readiness, they sometimes end up in a really healthy relationship really quickly. Because it's not impossible. And it's not what the internet leads us to believe it is. So, as I close out today's episode, I want to say, if you're a man listening to this, if you're a woman listening to this, I have deep, deep compassion for the position that both of you are in. It's hard out there. It's brutal. It's never been like this before. I want to say, if you're a man, the number one currency you can bring to a relationship is emotional intelligence and emotional availability. If you feel like the world has left you behind, if you feel like you don't matter anymore, if you feel like you have no place in it, if you feel like you don't care, or women don't care, start practicing your emotional availability, your emotional intelligence. Start reading books on that. Talk to a therapist about it. Start practicing your emotional intelligence and start relating with women on that level. And you will find a partner. I guarantee it. Ladies, I know it looks like you're so far ahead, and in so many ways you are. Resist the temptation to let your greater knowledge make you superior, make you entitled. Be willing, to some degree, to be the spiritual leader of a relationship. Be willing to not be the one who fixes a man or does the work for him, but the one who exposes him to things that he wouldn't have seen without you. Be relentless about your standards without being harsh or judgmental. Let a man know how he can show up for you and give him the opportunity to do so. And if he doesn't, say, hey, I've given you a chance and I can't continue to give you more. But don't expect perfection. Don't expect him to be evolved in the same ways you are. Expect him to care enough to try. Expect him to have integrity, to be honest, to be accountable, to make sincere effort. And the more people who practice these very simple things, there's going to be a place where they meet in the middle. And social media is going to be full of women who hate men and men who hate women. But underneath the chaos, you're going to be happily living in a conscious partnership with someone you can trust, someone who appreciates you, someone who loves you, and someone who's worthy of your devotion. And I wish that for all of you. So thank you for being with me today. If you've made it this far in the conversation, that says a lot about you, because this isn't something most people want to talk about. And this weighs on me because I see both sides of the coin so clearly. And it's heartbreaking because I know if we could all just see both sides of the coin, and if we could just recognize that life is fucking hard for everybody and nobody's doing it perfectly, but hate is not the answer. We would heal this a lot faster. And so start by healing it for yourself. And then let that be a ripple effect that spreads outward. Lots of love and blessings, everybody. Thank you for being with me today. I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.